It's another step. Can you see what I'm going to go where there's not in the sun. Oh, you got to be there.
I got to do that.
It's dealing with cancers.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a great retreat, Alex.
Oh, I'm glad.
It was a huge blessing. God just did a great thing.
I'm glad.
It's interesting. The bishop has never mentioned anything like Syrian refugees. Has he? He's got so many history of refugees. Kristen, you are so glad you're here. This okay, one thing, her and seminary. You'll see why. Because priests, this is what she's dealing with, is the pastoral despair dealing with many people. How do I get up and preach this? That's what she's doing. And the seminarians need to hear this so they know they're equipped. So the Josephinum, this is being reported, the Josephinum is Anna has, there's so many hats, and it's been the most fascinating last evening talking with her about what she's doing. We're going to record her presentation, so your friends, as you're listening to it, you're like, I can't believe so-and-so's not here, it's going to be recorded. So you can host a little group in your house afterwards and show it. And then at the end, we're going to turn off the recording for question and answers, because there's some such interesting things that she's been doing. But I'm going to let her begin, because I can't describe all the hats as well as she can. My brother, who's a medical doctor, is on her board. That's why. Pardon me? Oh. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Dear Holy Spirit, please, through the intercession of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, let us, particularly in this diocese and then with the others we know outside of the diocese, may this information go forward to shed your light and your grace upon your people. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here, and thank you to Sister for arranging this. There's no greater fan of the Flanagans than myself, so it's really a pleasure to be here today. What I'd like to try to do is outline very briefly the history of the World Youth Alliance and the work that I do, and how that led to the two programs that I'll specifically map out and go through here with you. So the World Youth Alliance was founded 18 years ago in 1999 in New York at the United Nations. It was founded in response to Cairo Plus 5. These were the international conferences that were happening really through the 90s under the leadership of the Clinton delegation and many others. And some of you might remember that John Paul II was very, very active in intervening in these conferences. Why? Because Cairo, the original Cairo, 5 years before we were founded, really had as its goal and purpose to establish abortion as an international human right. And that's a different story, where the Vatican and some other small players really weren't able to change the course of history at that time. But we came into the picture in 1999 when a small group of young people were brought in. 32 young people were given the floor, and they said, we represent all 3 billion of the world's youth, and these are our demands as young people. They demanded abortion as a human right, sexual rights for children, and a deletion of parents' rights. So I went in the next morning with bright pink flyers that said, these youth do not represent all 3 billion of the world's youth. This is why. That caused pandemonium. For 2 hours, the negotiations were stalled. And in that time, the world divided. Many of the Western states went with the Clinton U.S. delegation, and many of the developing nations came up to us and said, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having a presence. And they said to us, you need to have a full-time presence at the UN and come to our countries and work with our young people. So this was the beginning of the World Youth Alliance. We now have 6 regional offices around the world. We train young people under the age of 30 to understand and articulate this vision of the human person and how this then relates to all of these big topics in which the dignity of the person is often under attack. We've maintained a presence in these 18 years primarily at the UN and at the EU, but we've also engaged in national battles, which are international in origin. And Sister and I were talking about the Philippines, which was a very important area for us over the last 13 years as the RH, the Reproductive Health Bill, came up and worked on there. So what did we learn in this time? We learned that this attempt to create abortion as an international human right, linked always to the promotion of population control, is always preceded by 2 other programs that are brought into countries on the ground, very concrete, very practical, and these are sexual education and gender programs, as well as women's reproductive health programs. And so what we saw, and what we really look at within the World Youth Alliance, was that to understand policy, we first had to understand this, what we call policy wheel. That policy drives funding, whether that's domestic or international. Those that fund, those funds are for implementation, and those who have programs to implement can better influence policy. This is very practical, it makes a lot of sense, but it's not in fact how many of our strategies and debates have been constructed. And what we really saw internationally was that in looking at all of these topics, you could win or lose at any point of the circle, but you would ultimately lose if you couldn't influence all 3 aspects. So what's an example of that? Oops, very sensitive screen. So Cairo, as I mentioned, in 1994 was the great international conference on population and development, and John Paul took a very active element in this. His letter to women came as a result of Cairo and in Beijing, but John Paul was working with his diplomats and, as he said, with all people of goodwill. And what was the policy fight at Cairo? It was this question of reproductive health. And the fight at Cairo was, all technical terms aside, does reproductive health include abortion or not? And John Paul's victory at Cairo was that the term reproductive health does not include abortion. So in 1994, the Holy See, with many allies, people of goodwill from around the world, won the policy fight. But now here we are 20 years later, and what happened? At the ground level of implementation, the only people who have implemented reproductive health programs have de facto interpreted that term to include abortion. So Planned Parenthood and International Planned Parenthood Federation and their allies are the primary people implementing this term both in the United States and abroad. And they have simply interpreted it as including abortion. And so now 20 years later we have a policy debate that we won, but the waters are very murky now. And there's a lot of concern about the term because we haven't been able to implement it in any other way. There are many other examples of this. I think what we can see in the United States is that Planned Parenthood Federation of America has 800 clinics. They serve 1.5 million women, mostly below the poverty level. And as a result of this implementational capacity, they have really been able to determine what is women's health, and this was really the HHS mandate. So we can see how this policy wheel works. What we saw was we don't have the tools that we need. We can make winnable arguments in winsome ways. We can train our young people to defend and articulate these concepts, and they can do that. But they need to be able, if they want to engage, to win, or to build breathing space, or to move ideas in a new direction, those ideas have to be implemented. And that's really what we have now set out to do. So what we have developed is really a sexual education and gender curriculum and a women's reproductive health program. And I'm going to go through both of those with you. The HDC, our gender and sex ed curriculum, really we saw what is gender. Gender is another word for anthropology. It's really how are we teaching young people to understand who they are? What is my personal identity? And how do I then choose to live my life as we go forward. And so we have a beautiful anthropology that we can develop and scale out and put this into a curricular format that meets state and international guidelines, allowing governments to adopt this and implement it if they wish, and allowing others who are not bound to these guidelines to adopt and implement it as they wish. And so we'll go through the curriculum as a first basis because this is really how the World Youth Alliance begins. Who is the human person is always the first step in answering then these broader questions of how we move forward. This is the human dignity curriculum. So from kindergarten to grade 8, we have this content now developed. These themes emerge in every grade, but we begin always with this idea of human dignity. What is it? What does it tell me about myself? How does it influence the way I should live? We then talk about this hierarchy, these powers of living beings, recognizing that all living things share certain powers, and humans then have very special powers that are unique from plants, that are unique from animals, and that's really the ability to think and choose. It allows us to have a moral response to the world around us, to the emotions and to the experiences that we share with animals and others. But we have this really important and unique power, and this allows us to determine who we are and the kind of actions and choices we want to make. And then we move through that to really understand how can I become who I am through the choices I make in my life. Then, at the grade 6 level, if schools or individuals wish, we link that curriculum to what we call Teen FEMM or Teen Men, and that gives us a sexual education curriculum that allows us again to look at the science and evidence-based information that children need to know. How is my body growing and changing? What are the hormones that I'm experiencing? How do these influence my emotions? And again, remembering that I have the ability to think and choose. So my emotions are neither good nor bad, but they become good or bad based on how I think and choose about them. And so linking these changes in my body, how I treat myself, how I treat others. Do I treat others and myself as objects or as a subject? How can I learn to make habits for human excellence? Making choices every day that become a habit that respect my human dignity and the dignity of others. And this program is now starting to be implemented very broadly. The Philippines is actually in the process of a memorandum of agreement with the entire government. This would mean the entire curriculum will be taught in every school in the Philippines that wishes it. The government of Croatia has approved this program already, and I'll be going later this week to St. Lucia, which is the small Caribbean island where we actually piloted this program and a women's health program with the government to present these results that we achieved with them, and we hope to have cabinet adoption of this program for rollout at that national level. In the United States, our pilot partners for this program have been public charter schools in the Bronx who continue to use the program, and I think I've changed all of what I need to
Close
do.
that thing.
And now we're expanding into diocesan implementation around the United States as well. I've ruined this high-tech system somehow.
I still think it's not.
Is it?
There you go.
Okay. So these are some of the responses we've had in the evaluation of the curriculum, but what's important is that the children love the curriculum and they respond to the big ideas in it. We had a 10-year-old who recognized that the purpose of this curriculum was to become excellent, and as she said, and adults think I can become excellent. A lot of what we're doing is really inspiring the moral imagination of the child so that they have a very clear and a very high-level idea of who they are, what they can become, concretely how they can achieve that. And this is very, very exciting. Young children know that they're being entrusted with big ideas, and this changes very concretely the actions and the choices that they make. And we've seen this with street children and slum children, and we've seen it with some of the middle range schools, and we've also seen it with some of the most privileged kids where we've done different pilots around the world and within the United States. So these are our current partners. As I mentioned, we have activities going on in the Bronx. We have some Catholic schools in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We're working with a shelter for abused young women who are pregnant, mostly girls, 14 to 18, who have been trafficked sexually. These are social workers. They are working with this program with the girls' street children in Mexico. In Malta, the bishops have adopted this for all Catholic schools in the country, and then our very exciting developments in the Philippines. So it's brand new. We pulled the curriculum out of pilot in August, and we're seeing a very quick and a very exciting development and uptake. So these, I'm going to move through and answer more questions later, but move on to FEMM. And so FEMM is that other solution that we needed. So we needed a curriculum solution, and then we needed a women's reproductive health solution. And with FEMM, we really had to face these questions. Is women's health just contraception and abortion, or is women's health something else? And so when we took a look at what was needed internationally, we saw that it was exactly the same thing that many people face in their families and our communities. Women, we talk a lot about women's health, it's very political, but when we dug into the details, we found that we actually don't really give women very much health care at all. And so there are really key needs facing women, and this is the structure of what we've developed. So we have education for women, we train teachers, we train peer-to-peer counselors, we have an app. Our FEMM app now has about 230,000 users around the world. It's in English and Spanish. And then we have medical management, training doctors so that they can support women when we can identify abnormalities, symptoms, problems, getting them the support they need. So, what does this mean? To meet human rights standards for women's health and healthcare, women need to meet the standard of informed choice, and we think that we can make an argument that FEMM meets the standard better than any of the existing programs that are offered and supported in many countries, and I'll just sort of outline why. So when we take a look at reproductive health in particular, this is often reduced to contraception and abortion, but in fact, once we have some informed choice and information about how our bodies work, we can see that reproductive health is related to the health of our whole body, and that all of these have to really be understood together. So when we look at a woman's body, we always say the key thing is hormones, and intuitively, everyone understands this, can feel like we're just developing a stereotype, but the important thing to realize is that hormones are directed from the brain. Young girls are so happy to hear this. And there's a sort of communication, a little dance that happens between the ovaries and the brain. And women's hormones are so complex because we're dealing with multiple hormones that are changing those levels, and each one has to reach a certain level to trigger the next hormone and to go back and forth from the brain to the ovaries, and this affects their entire body. So when we take a look at the cycle, we actually have this initial hormone is triggered from the brain. The follicle-stimulating hormone is launched by the brain, and when that hormone level, so we'll be looking at the activity of the follicle. This is too sophisticated for me. Here you'll be able to track the activity of the follicle, and here you'll be able to see the hormone graphs, because this helps to see what's going on. So here we have the follicle inside the ovary that's recruited because that hormone graph has risen. And you can see that that rise in FSH is not very big, but it has to be a certain amount to trigger that follicle development. Once that happens, that triggers the ovary. So the brain communicates to the ovary to develop estrogen. So the follicle fills with estrogen, and here we can see the blue estrogen line. It starts to rise. And what do we know? We know that for the follicle to ovulate, the amount of estrogen is not important. What's important is that estrogen is rising on a slope. And this slope action has to happen for the amount of estrogen needed to communicate with the brain and call down this hormone, the LH hormone, that causes that follicle to rupture. And here we can see LH really has that job. It comes in at this point where estrogen is high enough and triggered. That slope action is what triggers it. Then this is really a plateau of LH, and then it's done its job. And once the follicle is released, the egg is released from the follicle, we have that explosion, really, in ovulation. This new hormone, progesterone, comes in, and that completes the cycle. What is important to realize here is that we need each four of these major reproductive hormones to be at the right level at the right time for any of this to happen. And bear in mind what you see here, that if ovulation does not happen, the body will not produce progesterone. So what does this mean? It means that when we start to take a look at the functions of what we often consider reproductive hormones, they influence our entire body as women. And note that estrogen often increases and produces activity in the brain, in the blood system, in all of these different areas in well-being. It increases activity. This rise to ovulation is a time when many things are excited and moving, but relaxation and maintenance is the job of progesterone. And so if a woman or girl is not ovulating, remember, she will not be producing any progesterone. Her bones will not be maintained. She won't have that relaxation in the bone development. It makes them strong. Her brain will be different. And all of these other things and projections of anxiety are, we need both levels to be at the right level for all of this to happen. So we know that hormonal insufficiency, too much, too little, leads to health problems across the board. Leads to all of these problems, along with, migraines, anxiety, depression, weight gain, weight loss. A lot of conditions that women experience are related to hormonal changes and imbalances. And all of these things influence our hormones. And why? Because remember, that hormonal activity is launched at critical phases from the brain. And everything influences the brain. And so this is very important for women and young adolescents to know. Because what we want them to understand is here's how your body works, here's what health feels like, and here's what we can do to help you when something goes wrong. So we're teaching them to understand what's happening inside their organs, what's happening under the microscope, but charting these hormonal fluctuations is like giving them a window into their whole body. They can, once they learn these hormonal patterns, extrapolate what's happening in their organs, what's happening in their brain. And that can empower them to understand if what they're experiencing is healthy or normal. So, our young women, like many others, can start to understand from their charting patterns if everything is healthy or normal. And they know what these mean. So here we want to see about 3 to 5 days of bleeding in a certain pattern. Sometimes we have some dryness after that. Then we have the estrogenic rise. And here we have then dryness for the luteal phase. So this tells us that estrogen rose. The distinction between that slippery, moist feeling to dryness tells us ovulation happened. And we have a sufficient luteal phase to tell us progesterone is high. In a woman like this, if she has severe pain, then we start to take a look at some of the riders against this. But these should be women who are not feeling as many symptoms. But then we get to a lot of different charts that we see. Here we have a woman who has a lot of bleeding initially. She seems to have an estrogen rise. It looks like ovulation takes place, but then she has a lot of bleeding again. She has that early luteal phase fallout. And these women tend to have a lot of fatigue, a lot of depression, maybe more PMS, maybe a lot of cramping. And this is because all of their hormones are a little bit out of whack. We can work that up and understand it. Here we have a lot of dryness and a few little estrogenic patches. And so would this be normal or healthy for a woman?
It's not normal.
Never? Yes, so if she's just entering puberty, this might be her experience. If she's breastfeeding, this might be her experience. So at different phases, we have this kind of experience of basically the ovary waking up. The ovary, in a sense, quiet during pregnancy, its job is done, then waking up again after pregnancy, and moving back into these mature, healthy cycles. This is on top of the normal cyclical functioning of a woman. They have these lifestyle changes. that are all moments where these hormones can be very difficult to manage. And so it's a very complex process. And this is why it's been very difficult to really understand how we can help women and how we can better treat them and give them the support they need. Here's another chart where we have a woman who seems to have a pretty healthy estrogen pattern. She's got a nice luteal phase, but all of this yellow is indicating that something else is happening, maybe an infection, something we can clean up and help her with. So a lot of information comes out, and this information is information we can give directly to women through our app. The app gives them personalized feedback every day. What does the information I just inputted mean physiologically and within the context of my patterns? The app can help them read those patterns, and the app triggers a warning when we start to see that too many abnormal patterns are happening and we find this woman needs more support. So here's again what we have to remember. We have all this monthly fluctuation happening in a healthy adult cycle, but we have also a fluctuation that's happening over a lifespan of a woman, and all of this becomes very complex very quickly. So what we had to do was then say we can teach women how their bodies work, we can understand this hormonal activity, we know what these healthy and normal elements should be, but what are we able to do then to diagnose and correct the underlying imbalances when these emerge, and to kind of set the stage for that? In the United States today, 60% of women are put on contraception for a health reason. And so this means they're going to their doctors because they have acne, they have migraines, they have fatigue, they have pain, irregular cycles, too much bleeding, too little bleeding. And the standard protocol right now is to manage those symptoms. We want the women's symptoms to feel better. And that is very important, and it is the right thing to do if it's the only thing to do. But the good news is we can now do more. Science has moved forward, and the key to really diagnosing and treating, not just managing those symptoms, is in the reproductive endocrinology. It's understanding, doing a deep dive into these hormones. And so when we identify women who need that support, either because they have symptoms that haven't been taken seriously or they no one can explain, or because we see them on our app and we can see that they need support, then we have now developed medical protocols that allow us to train medical providers to give women the support they need. So I want to walk through that briefly. We're looking again at the ovarian continuum and the ovulatory cycle. So we saw that we both need to look at the cycle and where the woman is in the continuum to know what support she needs. From our perspective, as we saw, ovulation is a sign of health. It's what tells us that all of her hormones are acting in the right way. That's what ovulation is a sign of. The charting is a very important tool for us, and it engages women as primary partners in the management and understanding of their health. Now I'm going to show you what we take a look at medically when we need to give more support. So the important thing on the ovarian continuum is that in 2 times in a woman's life, she is flooded. Her brain and her body are flooded with hormones. And these are really the moments that set the whole trajectory of her hormonal health, which influences all of her health and well-being, as well as her fertility. It happens in utero, very important, and it happens in adolescence. So these are the 2 moments where the hormonal axis kick in and they influence not just her life, but because of the in utero activity, they influence the lives of her future generations as well. So correcting these hormonal imbalances, even for women who are in that childbearing process, is very important to the future health of their children. So what we're looking for is when this ovarian continuum comes into place with adolescents. This is what we want to see in a normal cycle. Many women will say, well, this is normal for me. Physiologically speaking, endocrinologically speaking, we know what is normal in terms of health. A healthy, normal adult cycle is one which is 24 to 36 days long, has a clear ovulatory pattern, and has a luteal phase of 9 to 18 days. This is what we want to see in an adult woman. And so when we're looking at cycles, teaching women, when our app is working with women, first, this is what we look at. Is the cycle normal or abnormal? And when we have a cycle that's too short, too long, or has any missing factors from those elements, we advise after 2 of those cycles in a row, or 3 in a year, to move towards the FEMM medical management. And this is also in the case of teenagers, that we often get a young woman who's 21 who has never cycled, and she'll say her doctor said, it's okay, enjoy your track team, this will come for you. We want to see that basically young women have that hormonal axis kick in, and there's a very direct and clear movement to maturity. It happens at a different speed for everyone, but you don't want to see it get stalled. So very quickly we know the hormonal axis has been interrupted, and we want to then give women the support. And again, when we're thinking about this, remember the relationship between hormones in the brain. And adolescence and an early intervention in adolescent difficulties is critical because of brain plasticity. The brain needs to learn, and sometimes can be helped to learn what it should be doing to maintain a full lifetime of health. So that's what we're looking at there. And when we see these problems, then this is what we now start to dig into. These are the hormones that we look at to see what's going wrong. It's not just the major, let's say, 4 reproductive hormones that we know about. All of these hormones have to be in the right level at the right time for that reproductive activity to happen. Appropriate levels of estrogen is the end game. Appropriate levels of progesterone is the end result of all of this happening in such a way that ovulation occurs. And that's why ovulation is the sign of health in a woman throughout her reproductive years. So once these hormones have been identified, what we're doing in testing these hormones is looking at every part of the body that's producing hormones, that's relating back and forth, so that we can understand and diagnose where this fundamental underlying condition is emerging. We look at the symptoms that the women present with, we look at different ovulatory and other elements, and then we start to correlate what we're seeing on the chart with the diagnosis we give. So here we have an example of gray represents dryness. So we have basically dry cycles with a little bit of bleeding. If we come over here, we can see these hormones are all low. These are the normal hormones that are tested for most women when they present with these types of ovulatory cycles. And usually then that's as far as they get. They say, well, everything is low and we're not sure what to do, so let's just restore cycling. And we'll give you the pill so that you bleed regularly, and that's better for your health. All of the work that we do in assessing those underlying hormones allows us to identify the primary disturbance. And that's this critical part of reproductive endocrinology. That estrogen, progesterone on its own won't tell us why those are low or high. It can be cortisol that's low or high, that's driving everything low. It can be leptin that's low, that's making everything low. It can be, in this case, an absence of olfactory bulbs. But identifying this primary hormonal driver for the change in the disturbance is the key to getting a diagnosis. And this is what so many women don't get. You don't have to go very far to have stories of women who spend years and years circling doctors, nothing gets put together, and they don't get the diagnosis, and without a diagnosis, we can't give them effective treatment. So FEMM is working to get women the diagnosis that they need, quickly and clearly, empower them to understand what's normal or abnormal, and then link them to networks of providers who can assist them in doing that work of figuring out what that underlying hormonal imbalance is, and then giving them the health care to correct and treat that. So all of this has become sort of our proposal for how we can actually take these ideas that have been presented and do them better. More accurately build programs that really respect the human person, that are science and evidence-based, and that give us new ways to better serve our children, our women, and our families by getting them the care that they need. So that's kind of the overview that I'm happy to give, and maybe we can, any questions you have or conversations from here, I'm happy to entertain.
So using the app, you discover there's an abnormality of some kind or something's out of whack. And you said that's where they go to FEMM Medical. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. So the app gives them personalized feedback. When the women use the app, they can choose to use it to track their health, to achieve or avoid pregnancy, and they get specific help every day based on what they're looking to use the app for. When the app sees, we showed our parameters for abnormal cycles. So if we see we have 2 or more abnormal cycles in a row, the app informs the woman and says, you might consider reaching out to us to be put in touch first, normally with the FEMM teacher. Let's see if it's abnormal because you have some confusion about how to chart and what's going on. Or we can see immediately it's abnormal. They'll send us their chart sometime and you just have so much bleeding or you have no activity. In that instance, we don't have to check their charting. It's very clear that there are difficulties that need to be upgraded, let's say, to a FEMM doctor right away. So as they send us their questions, it is dependent on the app user. We can tell them that it's time to get support, and then if they contact us for that support, we can start to link them into these networks of online teacher help and support, and then dependent on the geographic area, referring them to FEMM-trained doctors, or we have one doctor in the United States who does provide telemedicine, and so that does allow a pretty broad bandwidth of support. Yeah.
And what is required to train your teachers? Or how do you implement the human dignity curriculum? And what is required to be trained as a particular educator?
So there are 2 different training modules. For our FEMM teachers, anyone can be trained, let's say, medical or non-medical. And we now offer that training online. And we found that it's more effective online because especially non-medical women prefer to have the segmentation of content. So to be a FEMM teacher, we have a 10-week online course, 90 minutes per week. Each week there's content provided over a video webinar where women can interact. There's a support system for questions, but there are assignments and quizzes linked to the content per week, and then support given to them to train teachers and work with us through that process, concluded by an exam. So it's usually about a 6-month process from beginning to end, even though the content itself takes only 10 weeks to complete. For the curriculum in schools, we train teachers to develop the baseline of the human dignity curriculum, and we do that in person or online in a 3-hour session that can be, again, based on geography, in person or online. But for teen FEMM, and then we have teen men, so the sexual education modules, we basically have people do the online FEMM training without the full certification. So they do the 10-week modules, they make sure they understand the science and the physiology. They don't have to become FEMM teachers because they're not expected to be medical or teaching support to the children, but they need to understand the content well enough to support the children and the questions they might ask. So in the Bronx, where we have our first charter school that's using this, they have been teaching the anthropology already for a year. They're very excited to now bring in the teen FEMM and the teen men. And so they've identified 2 female and 2 male doctors who are doing the FEMM training online in order to prepare to implement that sexual education module starting in January of this year. So we'll be walking with them through that process, but that's an initial beginning as we work, and that's gone very well. One of the things we've seen actually with the curriculum in schools is that the curriculum has these beautiful effects on the children, but also on the teachers. And as teachers thumb through it, they'll often say, well, we already do all of these things, but it's the sequencing, it's the specificity of the details, it's building a rich framework of big ideas that's very exciting for the teachers as for the students. And so a lot of the teachers have said, I really thought I knew this, and I was really surprised at what I learned, and I'm so excited to be sort of pursuing these ideas grade by grade with my kids. So that's been a wonderful thing to observe.
So the 10-week is for training.
For FEMM.
For FEMM, because this lady works with the National Center of Training for our diocese.
Okay, yeah, so that would be a way to qualify teachers for that process, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And what about involving parents? We've had limited success with bringing Family Honor here, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that program, but they're also teaching similar content, but but also specifically involving the parents in those programs. So it's a little bit different format. It's not built for being taught in school. It's more
right. So what we have seen is that For the FEMM program, one of our most popular programs is Teen FEMM. So after FEMM teachers are certified, they have the option to do a Teen FEMM course, which is just a little bit extra pedagogy and methodology. And so that has been delivered in various ways. But that's a kind of program that our FEMM teachers offer either to mothers and daughters or to daughters that their mothers opt in. The mothers can do the adult program, the daughters. So that's been a way that has engaged families. We have a lot of nurses who've offered this in, let's say, a healthcare clinic as an after-school program for girls. And most of the families have found that they want to create a place where the girls have, say, medical authority. They have other young girls or women their age thinking about this. And so the mothers are happy to know what's being taught, that they would prefer not to be there, and start to kind of expand that circle and give those girls what they need. But it really can be taught as families and teachers and dioceses want it. And so we've seen different models are important, and parents need support in different ways. In terms of the school, our project in the Bronx is with a very poor, socioeconomic poor. A lot of our parents are single parents. A lot of them are working 2 or 3 jobs. A lot of them are really relying as partners with the school to provide some of the moral and other support that they want their children to have. And it's been very difficult to bring those parents in for additional sessions, and we've tried a variety of ways. But the school is very excited to bring the parents in, again, to teach them as adults, in order for them to understand what they'll be teaching their children through the Teen FEMM program. And they'll be testing that they think sort of offering adult enrichment to the parents as part of engaging the parents will be something more attractive for them in making time in what are very limited schedules. So there are, I think, a lot of ways that parents can be involved. We recommend and support as much parental involvement as people and programs want. But our experience has been that in different areas, what that looks like concretely will change. And so we've been flexible in working with our partners that way.
Now, Mom, who was with us yesterday, was excited to hear that for her 2nd grade daughter, she can download the curriculum for $35 and teach it to her at home. The curriculum, although it's a curriculum, is only 10 hours in a whole year. So it's short. It has the great acronym of Thomas for Tots, because it's really looking at, I didn't understand, except for hearing Anna talk about it, that, when you think sex ed, you think it's going through a diagram or whatever. No, it's really, what are you as a human person? What can you do? What can you become? And that's the big idea. So I can become, when you realize you can choose and know, it's this other the view of the human person that is the basis of then later, as a teen, what am I, what can I do, what can I become? So it's very interesting in that way, so that you can actually download that and go through it.
Anna, some of the science that you're talking about sounds very similar to Dr. Hilger's research, Creighton model. What are the connections or distinctions, if any, between what you're presenting and, say, Paul VI Institute or the science that they're promoting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we can do that later.
No, I'm happy to move into these questions, which are very important, but I think it's probably better for everyone if we...
I did try to signal at the start if we were going to stop.
Do you have any other material you want to present on the live stream before we end?
No, I think this is a good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.